Look at your hands. You are being robbed in broad daylight. Your entire existence is a beautifully decorated cage designed to make someone else rich. But a ruthless mathematical cheat code exists. Watch until the end to discover the exact formula that will brutally shatter your financial matrix forever. Look at your hands. In the time it took you to wake up this morning, sit in that suffocating traffic, and stare at a glowing screen, a fraction of your irreplaceable life simply evaporated. You are being robbed in broad daylight, not by a thief in an alley, but by a magnificent, meticulously crafted illusion that bleeds you dry while convincing you that you are on the path to success. You have been shoved into the role of a disposable extra in a grand economic theater. Yet you wake up every day chanting the most toxic lie ever fed to humanity. Just work hard and you will eventually be rich. Welcomes you to the brutal awakening. Before we tear down the walls of this financial matrix and show you the way out, please hit that subscribe button to support the channel and give us the fuel to keep delivering these life-altering truths to you. Now, let us look at the cold, unforgiving numbers. Look at the top 1%, or even just the quietly wealthy people in your own city who possess true financial freedom. Did a single one of them build their empire by sitting in a cubicle from 9 to 5, waiting for a pathetic paycheck at the end of the month, and carefully saving pennies in a jar? Absolutely not. The tragic irony of the traditional working model is that its very mathematical structure is designed to guarantee you never cross the threshold of true abundance. The moment you secure a slight raise from a condescending pat on the back, inflation, taxes, and the silent cancer of lifestyle creep immediately swallow the difference. You are trading the only finite asset you will ever possess, the ticking seconds of your life, for a depreciating fiat currency. This is not a roadmap to wealth. It is a slow, agonizing march toward financial death. The fundamental divide between the elite and the rest of the world does not come down to who sweats more or who works harder. It comes down to a ruthless, invisible line drawn in the sand. The difference between being the owner and being the owned. In this relentless economic casino, if you do not own assets, you are the asset. When you clock in, your intellect, your energy, and your vanishing youth become the leverage your boss uses to buy his fourth supercar or his lake house. You can boast all you want about your senior management title or your prestigious corporate badge, but the brutal reality is that your name is not on the company deed. You hold no equity. The net profit at the end of the year does not flow into your bank account. You are merely a fleshy machine generating cash flow for someone else. And the second your depreciation outpaces your utility, you will be discarded without a second thought. True ownership is not about buying a financed luxury car or a designer bag to impress strangers you secretly despise. Those are liabilities masquerading as success. True ownership is a desperate, burning obsession to acquire things that print money while your eyes are closed. Corporate equity, real estate, intellectual property, or an automated business ecosystem. I am not preaching hollow theory to you. I want to take you back to a completely hopeless chapter of my own life. Back when I was a broke, terrified kid staring into a future so bleak that just thinking about tomorrow made my chest physically ache. I worked like a mindless drone, grinding through endless shifts, collecting starvation wages, and blindly trusting the system that told me saving my way to the top was possible. But the harder I swam, the faster I sank. No matter how much I starved my own desires, the pathetic savings I scraped together were instantly vaporized by the skyrocketing price of a single piece of suburban dirt. I was playing a rigged game where the rulebook was authored by the house, explicitly to ensure I lost. It was not until I hit rock bottom that I finally woke up and discovered the cheat code of the financial universe. Money must be weaponized to buy back your freedom, never to upgrade the velvet lining of your chains. From a state of absolute zero, I began to radically restructure the financial blood flowing through my veins. I stopped trying to look rich and started building a foundation out of cold, heartless, but utterly honest numbers. That was the exact moment I engineered and ruthlessly optimized a mathematical blueprint that altered the trajectory of my entire existence. This is the 25-15-50-10 operating system. Do not confuse this with the garbage financial advice that tells you to skip your morning coffee. This is a framework of iron discipline, an aggressive cash flow matrix born to mutate you from a desperate wage slave surviving paycheck to paycheck into an apex predator accumulating assets. 25% for ruthless growth, 15% for an impenetrable defensive fortress, 50% to keep your physical body alive, and 10% to keep your soul from decaying into depression. Welcome to the absolute destruction of your old self and the beginning of your financial liberation. To understand how this absolute destruction of your old self begins, we must first look at the 25% that serves as the aggressive spearhead of your new financial existence. This quarter of your income is not money you save. It is money you deploy into the brutal battlefield of the market with the cold, calculated intention of conquering your future time. When I first initiated this protocol, carving out a full 25% of my meager paycheck felt like an act of self-mutilation. I was already gasping for air in an ocean of bills, and redirecting a quarter of my lifeblood into investments felt like I was suffocating myself on purpose. But that was the poverty mindset screaming in terror, the ingrained slave mentality that wanted me to hold on to depreciating cash out of fear. I had to force myself to realize that this 25% was the ransom I was paying to buy myself out of a lifelong prison sentence. It is the uncompromising engine of your wealth generation, and it must vanish from your primary checking account the exact millisecond your paycheck clears. You do not wait to see what is left at the end of the month, because human nature dictates that there will never be anything left. You pay your future self first, and you do it with the ruthless efficiency of an automated machine. Where does this money go? It goes into the silent, unglamorous trenches of asset accumulation. It buys broad market index funds that quietly compound while you sleep. It secures fractions of real estate that generate cash flow regardless of the economic weather. And it funds the acquisition of high-value skills that exponentially multiply your earning potential. Do not mistake this for the adrenaline-fueled gambling of day trading or throwing your hard-earned capital at whatever shiny cryptocurrency the internet is currently hyping. That is just another rigged casino designed to strip you of your newly accumulated power. True wealth building through this 25% is devastatingly boring. It is the monotonous, month-after-month discipline of stacking bricks to build an empire that no one can see until it is suddenly casting a massive shadow over their lives. I remember the exact moment the math finally clicked in my broken brain. I was sitting in my cramped apartment, staring at a brokerage account that had finally crossed its first major milestone, entirely funded by this relentless 25% extraction. I realized that the numbers on the screen were no longer just digits. They were invisible employees. Every dollar I had deployed was now a tiny worker, waking up before I did, never taking a sick day, never complaining, and constantly recruiting more pennies to join their ranks through the magic of compound interest. For the first time in my existence, I was not the one doing the heavy lifting. I had finally crossed the invisible threshold from being the asset to owning the asset. This requires an absolute, shattering ego death. You must willingly endure looking like a peasant to your peers who are drowning in consumer debt to appear wealthy. Your coworkers will mock you for driving a decaying sedan while they pull up in financed luxury SUVs. Your friends will question your sanity when you decline their expensive weekend trips to instead dump that cash into an S500 index fund. You will feel an isolating, crushing loneliness because you are actively detaching yourself from the financial matrix that holds everyone else hostage. They are playing a game of social status using monopoly money. You are playing a game of absolute survival and generational liberation using live ammunition. You must protect this 25% allocation with terrifying ferocity. If you get a raise, the 25% scales up. If you pick up a side hustle, the 25% swallows the profits. You never negotiate with this number. You never borrow from it. And you never suspend it just because you feel you deserve a reward for your hard work. The only reward you actually deserve is the sovereign ownership of your own existence. And the 25% is the only weapon capable of securing it. When you commit to this aggressive growth protocol, you stop being a passive observer of your financial decay and mutate into an apex predator, hunting for equity and hoarding productive assets. You begin to look at every purchase not in terms of its price tag, but in terms of the future freedom it is stealing from you. That designer jacket is no longer $300. It is thousands of dollars of compounded future wealth that you are sacrificing for a fleeting moment of vanity. Once your mind makes that permanent shift, the 25% stops feeling like a sacrifice and becomes an addiction. But that aggressive spearhead will inevitably snap if it is not backed by the unshakable foundation of the 15% defensive fortress. The universe is inherently chaotic, deeply unfair, and completely indifferent to your plans for wealth accumulation. You can be executing the 25% growth strategy flawlessly, but if you do not have a fortified wall of liquid cash standing between you and disaster, a single stroke of bad luck will wipe you off the map. This 15% of your income is dedicated exclusively to building an impenetrable emergency fund and aggressive debt annihilation. It is the armor that protects your investments from being prematurely liquidated when life inevitably punches you in the throat. Before I understood this, I tried to invest while teetering on the edge of a financial cliff. I had no safety net. When my car's transmission suddenly exploded in the middle of a brutal winter, I had no choice but to swipe a credit card at a suffocating 24% interest rate, instantly reversing months of grueling progress. The psychological devastation of that moment nearly broke me. It felt like trying to fill a bucket with a massive hole in the bottom. That disaster forced me to respect the 15%. This allocation is not about growth. It is about absolute, unquestionable security. It sits in a boring, high-yield savings account where it barely beats inflation, and that is entirely the point. Its job is not to make you rich. Its job is to keep you from becoming poor again. You channel this 15% into a liquid reserve until you have accumulated 3 to 6 months of baseline survival expenses. This is your go-to-hell fund. The psychological transformation that occurs when you know you can survive for half a year without a single paycheck is indescribable. The anxiety that used to tightly grip my chest every Sunday night before work slowly evaporated. My boss's veiled threats and corporate intimidation tactics suddenly lost their power. When you are financially fortified, you stop operating out of fear and start operating out of leverage. You can walk away from toxic environments, you can negotiate harder, and you can sleep through the night without staring at the ceiling, wondering how you will afford groceries if the company downsizes. Once the defensive fortress is fully stocked with your emergency reserves, this 15% immediately pivots to become a targeted weapon of mass destruction against any high-interest debt you carry. Credit cards, personal loans, and predatory vehicle financing are chains designed to keep you bleeding cash forever. You attack them with this 15% while maintaining your 25% investment protocol. You do not pause your investments to pay off debt, because doing so stalls your compounding momentum. Instead, you use the 15% fortress allocation to systematically execute your liabilities, starting with the highest interest rates, until your financial landscape is entirely cleared of hostile forces. I remember the day I finally transferred the last payment to clear my consumer debt. I sat in silence for nearly an hour. For the first time since I was a teenager, I did not owe a single institution a fraction of my future labor. I was no longer renting my life from a bank. The 15% allocation had done its job. It had built the wall, and then it had slaughtered the invaders. Even after the debt is gone and the emergency fund is full, this 15% does not go toward lifestyle upgrades. It transforms into a tactical reserve. You use it to fund sinking accounts for expected future expenses. A new roof, replacing that dying car with a reliable used vehicle paid in cash, or anticipated medical deductibles. It ensures that foreseeable expenses never become full-blown emergencies. It creates a moat around your wealth that inflation, unexpected tragedies, and predatory lenders simply cannot cross. Without this 15% defensive matrix, your wealth is just a sandcastle waiting for the tide to come in. With it, you are a fortress built on bedrock, entirely immune to the manufactured panics that constantly bankrupt the middle class. With your future aggressively funded and your defensive walls built high, you must now confront the brutal reality of the 50%. Keeping your physical body alive without falling back into the trap of lifestyle inflation. This is where the vast majority of the population fails, completely consumed by the desperate desire to live a lifestyle they have not actually earned. The 50% allocation covers your absolute necessities: housing, basic groceries, utilities, and essential transportation. Half of your income. That is the hard limit, the unyielding boundary line that dictates the geographical and physical reality of your existence. When I applied this merciless metric to my own life years ago, the mathematical truth was horrifying. My rent alone was consuming 40% of my income, and my financed car was eating another 15%. I was not surviving. I was actively hemorrhaging cash just to maintain the illusion that I was a functional, successful adult. To force my life into the 50% survival matrix, I had to undergo a violently painful downsizing of my ego. I broke the lease on my comfortable, aesthetically pleasing apartment in the trendy part of town and moved into a cramped, outdated box in a neighborhood where the streetlights only worked half the time. I sold the car that made me look successful and bought a spectacularly ugly 10-year-old compact car that squeaked when I turned the wheel. I stopped buying pre-packaged convenience meals and learned how to bulk cook rice, beans, and discounted poultry. It was humiliating. I felt like a colossal failure every time someone asked where I lived or saw what I drove. The societal programming is incredibly strong. It screams at you that if you are not constantly upgrading your environment, you are moving backward. But what I was actually doing was aggressively shrinking my financial footprint so my wealth engine could breathe. Living on 50% of your income requires a total rejection of modern normality. The modern world tells you that a $2,000 mortgage on a starter home is normal. It tells you a $600 monthly car payment is just a standard part of adulthood. It tells you that ordering food delivery 3 times a week is a justified convenience because you work so hard. It is all a fabricated, deeply sinister lie engineered to keep you trapped on the treadmill. To adhere to the 50% rule, you have to look at the normal American lifestyle and recognize it for what it truly is: a beautifully decorated cage. You must become a master of ruthless optimization. You negotiate your insurance rates, you wear sweaters instead of turning up the heat, and you treat grocery shopping like a tactical military operation focused purely on caloric efficiency and cost per ounce. This is not a permanent sentence to poverty. It is a temporary, highly strategic deployment of austerity. You live like a ghost for 5 years, so you can live like a god for the next 50. As your income increases over time, fueled by the skills and assets you are acquiring, the actual dollar amount of your 50% will organically grow. Eventually, 50% of a massive income will afford you a beautiful home and a comfortable life. But you earn that luxury through patience, not by leveraging your future on credit. The emotional friction of this phase is intense. You will constantly battle the voice in your head whispering, "You work so hard. You deserve a better apartment. You deserve a nicer car." You must strangle that voice. What you deserve is freedom, and freedom is only purchased by denying your immediate gratification. When you successfully compress your survival needs into just half of what you make, you become incredibly resilient, almost bulletproof to economic downturns. If the economy crashes, or if you are forced to take a lower-paying job to escape a toxic industry, you do not panic because your baseline survival is incredibly cheap to maintain. You are light, agile, and free from the suffocating overhead that forces your peers to tolerate corporate abuse. The 50% survival matrix is the crucible where your financial discipline is forged. It teaches you the vital difference between what you actually need to sustain your biological existence and what you simply want in order to soothe your ego. Once you master this brutal compression, the world loses its financial grip on your throat, and you realize that true wealth is not about how much you spend, but how little you require to be completely at peace. Yet, surviving this rigorous optimization requires acknowledging a fundamental human flaw, which is why the final 10% exists, to keep your soul from decaying into absolute bitterness. We are not machines. We are biological creatures driven by dopamine, emotion, and an innate desire to experience the beauty of the world. If you attempt to operate entirely on the 90% matrix of investing, saving, and bare-bones survival, you will eventually snap. I know this because I tried it. I tried to push my optimization to 100%, denying myself every single pleasure, every drop of joy, treating every spent penny as a moral failure. For 8 months, I existed in a state of self-imposed purgatory. I alienated my friends, my mental health completely deteriorated, and I woke up one morning staring at a healthy bank account but feeling an overwhelming, dangerous urge to liquidate it all and flee to a tropical island just to feel alive. Financial discipline without a psychological release valve is a pressure cooker with no exhaust. It will inevitably detonate, destroying everything you have built in a catastrophic binge of revenge spending. This is the sacred purpose of the 10% sanity valve. This allocation is your guilt-free, no questions asked allowance to experience the present moment. It is the money you intentionally burn to remind yourself why you are fighting this war in the first place. You use this 10% to go to a concert, to buy that overpriced artisanal coffee without doing the math, to take your partner to a beautiful dinner, or to purchase a video game that lets you escape reality for a few hours. When I first implemented the 10% rule, the act of spending money purely for joy felt deeply wrong. My brain had been so heavily rewired for survival and accumulation that buying a moderately expensive bottle of wine made my hands sweat. But as I drank it, sitting in my terribly outdated, cheap apartment, I realized I was enjoying it completely free of guilt because the math permitted it. My 25% spearhead was already deployed. My 15% fortress was fully funded. My 50% survival was paid for. This 10% was mine to destroy. This small, deliberate indulgence prevents the burnout that derails so many aspiring wealth builders. It creates a sustainable psychological loop. You endure the harsh reality of the 50% survival matrix because you know the 10% reward is guaranteed. It proves to your primitive brain that the future you are building is not entirely devoid of pleasure, but rather that the pleasure is controlled, calculated, and earned. It teaches you the profound difference between mindless consumerism and deliberate enjoyment. When you only have 10% of your income to spend on fun, you stop wasting it on cheap, meaningless distractions. You begin to curate your joy. You realize that a weekly round of drinks with people you barely tolerate is a waste of your precious sanity valve, and you instead save that 10% for 2 months to fund a deeply meaningful weekend trip to the mountains. When you fully integrate the 25-15-50-10 operating system, you undergo a permanent mutation. You look back at the person you used to be, the exhausted, anxious extra in the economic theater, praying for a raise and drowning in invisible chains, and you barely recognize them. You have ceased to be the prey that the financial matrix feeds upon. By weaponizing 25% for ruthless growth, fortifying 15% against disaster, stripping your survival down to 50%, and preserving your humanity with the final 10, you become the architect of your own reality. You no longer hope for retirement at 65. You mathematically engineer your own emancipation on your own timeline. The world will still try to sell you the magnificent illusion. It will still dangle the financed luxury cars, the overpriced real estate, and the intoxicating drug of social status in front of your face. But their spells will no longer work on you. You have seen the raw, unforgiving numbers behind the curtain. You are no longer the owned. You have finally, brutally, and beautifully become the owner. The 25-15-50-10 financial matrix is not just a budgeting strategy. It is a complete psychological reprogramming designed to break you out of the modern economic trap. By deploying 25% of your income into aggressive asset accumulation, you construct an invisible army of compound interest that buys back your future time. The 15% defensive fortress shields this progress, acting as an impenetrable wall of liquid cash that neutralizes life's inevitable emergencies and systematically slaughters high-interest debt. To fuel this engine, you must force your ego through the crucible of the 50% survival matrix. This requires a ruthless rejection of societal norms, shrinking your physical footprint and trading the illusion of temporary status for the reality of permanent leverage. Finally, the 10% sanity valve ensures you do not break under the pressure, offering controlled, guilt-free enjoyment that sustains your momentum without derailing your empire. Together, these four pillars force a permanent mutation in how you perceive money, value, and time. You stop acting as a passive participant bleeding cash to impress people, and you transform into a financial apex predator. The transition is brutal, uncomfortable, and alienating, but the ultimate reward is the sovereign ownership of your own existence. You no longer merely survive the system, you conquer it, mathematically engineering your own liberation on your own terms. True wealth is not measured by the luxury you display, but by the autonomy you command. The modern definition of normal is a meticulously designed trap built on debt, instant gratification, and the continuous sacrifice of your future time. To become truly free, you must endure the discomfort of ego death and willingly look like a failure to a society that is secretly broke. Start by conducting a ruthless audit of your financial life. Calculate exactly what 50% of your income is and aggressively cut your living expenses, housing, transport, food, until they fit inside that boundary. Cancel the subscriptions, trade in the financed car if necessary, and downsize your environment. Next, automate your finances so that 25% immediately routes into broad market index funds and 15% goes into a high-yield emergency reserve or towards crushing debt the exact second your paycheck clears. Finally, take the remaining 10% and spend it completely guilt-free on experiences that genuinely recharge your soul. Do not wait for a raise to start this protocol. Enforce it on the income you have right now. Which of these four phases, the 25% investing, the 15% defense, the 50% survival, or the 10% enjoyment, do you think will be the most difficult for you to master? Please, leave your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to read your perspective, and it is a great way for everyone to share and learn from each other's insights. If this operating system changed how you look at your finances, please hit that subscribe button to support the channel. Your subscription gives us the drive to keep creating powerful, hard-hitting content to help you build your empire.